to the public. Eyewitnesses said that police broke Gray's neck by kneeling on his back and jerking his head back. Some say they bent him like a pretzel. He appears to be partially paralyzed when police dragged him into the van because he was unable to stand on his own. In the video, a woman yells at police saying that boy needs medical attention. By April 19th, Gray dies in the hospital from injuries that severed 80% of his spine. After the funeral on Tuesday, April 28th, protests started out peacefully but turned aggressive. Several police officers were injured and buildings were burned to the ground. The mayor and governor called in the National Guard, and Attorney General Loretta Lynch said that the federal government would make all resources available to them. Facebook was full of images and videos that mainstream media gave little coverage to. The Bloods and Crips called a truce and came together to stop the violence. They made it clear that their truce in no way meant that they were going after Baltimore police. There was also several pictures on Facebook of scores of Baltimore residents cleaning up the rubble left by the fires and the looting. Last night, the Washington Post reported that a prisoner who was in the police van with Gray allegedly told investigators that he could hear Gray banging against the walls and that he believed that Gray had deliberately injured himself. But according to Huffington Post, Baltimore Police Commissioner Anthony Bates said that before the second prisoner was loaded into the van, an officer had to pick Gray up off the floor and place him on the seat. Police said he asked for medical attention at this point. The second prisoner was also unable to see Gray as he would have been separated by a metal partition in the van. The second prisoner has not been identified, and it is not known who leaked the information to the Washington Post. Baltimore police are to conclude their investigation into Gray's arrest and death tomorrow, May 1st, and the case will go to Maryland's Attorney General's office. Their findings will not be made to the public immediately. And lastly, the weather. The good news is there will be no rain this week. Tomorrow it will be cloudy with a high of 59 degrees. The next 5 days temperatures will gradually go up to 80 degrees with rain on Tuesday. So prepare yourself for a little slice of summer vacation in the coming days because it will be hot, hot, hot. Back to you, Myra.
Thank you, Shabash. Well, we are now going to take a quick break.
Harlem has its own radio station. WHCR 90.3 FM, the voice of Harlem.
The number one natural disaster in the United States is flooding. The first step in protecting yourself is knowing your risk. FEMA will be updating preliminary flood insurance maps for all 5 boroughs so that all New Yorkers are informed about risk zones and insurance rates. These maps will help homeowners and renters make informed decisions when it comes to insuring their property and their families. The maps will also help communities determine how new developments will be built to ensure they are safe and secure. To learn about whether or not you're facing flood risk and to understand flood insurance requirements, visit www.floodhelpny.org or call FEMA at 1-877 FEMA MAP. That's 1-877-336-2627.
It's never too early to get your child thinking about their future. But where do you go for little or no cost help? At Harlem Educational Activities Fund, otherwise known as HEAF, you can get your child started on the right path. This nonprofit organization offers programs and activities for children from the 6th grade through college. Programs include academic advisement for both students and parents, preparation for specialized tests, college workshops and tours, and summer enrichment camp. Familiarize your child with the benefits of higher education today at HEAF, located at 2090 Adam Clayton Powell Jr. Boulevard. Take a step in the right direction for your child today. For more information, call 212-663-9732 or visit heaf.org.
It's WHCR, the boys of Harlem.
Well, Welcome back. After 26 years, people are still talking about the Central Park Five who were falsely convicted of the rape of Central Park jogger. Reporter Dominic will talk to Yusef Salam, one of the Central Park Five.
Thank you, Myra. In 1989, the Central Park jogger rape case was all over the mainstream media. The case was sensationalized because the victim was a white female Wall Street executive, and the accused were 5 black teenagers and were known as the Central Park Five. Donald Trump took out a full-page ad in 4 New York newspapers calling for the death penalty for the accused rapists. In 2002, the 5 were exonerated and received a $40 million settlement. These teenage boys are now men, and one of them is in the studio with us today. Yusef Salam, thank you so much for coming to Harlem Beat.
Thank you for having me.
So start off with telling us about that day that you were arrested.
Oh, wow, that day was crazy. That evening when I came home from school, there was literally no child on the street. At that point, the officers had snatched up every child that was out there in the streets and had brought them down to be interrogated. And the only ones that stayed were the ones who were very unfamiliar with anything dealing with the criminal justice system. We became known as the Central Park Five. Actually, back then it was about 7 of us, and we were the ones that were beginning to be vilified in the media regarding this horrific crime that happened.
And how was the media portraying the exoneration and your jail time and the whole case in general? And how close was it to the truth?
Wow. So the job that the media did back in the late 80s, early 90s was so devastating that within the first few weeks, there were over 400 articles written about us. These articles were articles about, naming us as feral beasts, painting pictures as if we were animals, kind of making sure that the public at large would convict us in the media before we were being convicted by the courts. And when we were exonerated, my mother says it best, and I always use her words to describe how it came out. So 1989 and 1990, we were on every single front page newspaper everywhere. When we got exonerated 13 years later, she said it was like a whisper. She wondered if the rats had even heard. People to this day still have this lingering question as to, well, what really happened? Like, were they let go because of some type of technicality? Did the city drop the ball, but they were really guilty of something? That negative residue of those 400 articles that were written caused people like Donald Trump to use his own money, paying for ad space in New York City's newspaper, calling for the city to reinstate the death penalty specifically for our case. And I say all the time, like, had this been the 1950s, that same vigilante justice would have caused somebody from those darker places in society to come to our homes, because they had already published our addresses, they published our names, they published the names of our families, they published the phone numbers that we of folks that we the phone numbers of our homes, and it was a wonder that nobody physically came to our places, kicked in the door, drug us out of our homes, and hung us from trees in Central Park. This is the type of mob justice that they wanted. And when we got exonerated, like I said, people really didn't know we were exonerated. People didn't know that we had come home from prison. Wow. They didn't speak about the prison time, but prison, I always tell people, in prison I became a poet. And a lot of times people say to me, how did you get through that? And I say, it's very succinct in terms of poetry. I read a piece of poetry that said, prison life in many ways can be likened to the womb. If the life inside becomes stillborn, the womb becomes the tomb. And so you have to kind of figure out a way that you're going to cope with this society. Figure out a way that you're going to grow up very quickly so that you can survive, But you look at that and you look at the realities of people like myself and the rest of the Central Park Five, and not only that, but the countless numbers of people who are coming home from prison through the Innocence Project, people who are found to not have been guilty of a crime that they were accused of and went to prison for. Sometimes these folks are coming home as long as 39 years later. You know, there's no real re-entry programs that allow us to make a transition into society, become a productive citizen, you know.
So you had just mentioned the Innocence Project. When you were released from jail and you're working towards your exoneration, did they help you in any sort of form? Or what was the hardest part of really working towards the exoneration?
So we came home guilty.
Wow.
We came home having to register with the Megan's Law. We came home to parole. We came home to continuing the remainder of our prison sentence on the streets. We didn't come home through exoneration. You know, the only person who sort of came home through exoneration was Corey Wise, and he, in a way, really didn't even come home through exoneration either, but he was in prison for so long that he had already passed the conditional release date for him to come home from prison. His mentality was, I don't even want to come home to parole. I want to come home free. I don't want to have to do any kind of thing else regarding this system of injustice, you know. So most of us became really involved with the Innocence Project through the work that they've done, and also in recognizing that had the city really done the job of, you know, because like DNA was very new back then. And so when the Innocence Project was approached about assisting the Central Park Five, the response was that they really couldn't assist at that point in time. There was nothing that they could kind of, you know, assist us with, you know. So they weren't in a position then to help us, you know. But we do a lot of things with the Innocence Project now. I mean,
for those of us who don't know about the Innocence Project, can you describe a little bit about what they do and who they are? Yeah, the Innocence Project is really almost like the voice of the voiceless. You look at people like Alan Newton, who spent, I think, 23 years in prison for a crime he didn't commit. You look at other folks that we know, Jeff Deskovic, you know, a lot of these people who were in prison for tremendous amounts of time. And what happens with the justice system is that if you don't have money to pay for your legal services, if you don't have money to kind of make things a little bit easier for you so that you can get the type of services that you need, you're left to the whim of the system. And I call it the criminal system of injustice, because there's nothing there that allows us to really thrive. It used to be that you would go to prison, and prison would be called the Correctional Institute. And so you were going to prison for a short time to correct the behavior. Now you go to prison and you can't get educated. Now you go to prison and you can't get any kind of social services that you need. Now you go to prison and many times you come back home worse off than you were when you went in. You know, the enterprise are seeking transition easier. It will assist all kind of litigation, so that it happened to this Park 5 and others won't to anyone else. I mean, they were very, very quick to convict us. They convicted, we got convicted court, but very quick to convict us. And they were very slow to compensate us. Like I said, they found out that we were innocent back in 2002, late 2002, early 2003. We had been fighting this. We had a lawsuit placed in, and we had been fighting the system since 2002. We didn't win until 2014, and we really didn't win until the great film The Central Park 5 came out and really showed the public exactly what it was. I mean, the same videos, if you were old enough, the same videos that you saw of the false confessions of 4 of us were the same videos that you were seeing today. And the greatest thing that was happening was that there was an adult like Raymond Santana being able to talk about what it was that you were seeing. You know, if he's there on the film and he's reading his false confession, and in his false confession it says something that sounds normal back then, something like at around 9 p.m., me and a group of my colleagues, we began to walk south on the Central Park Traverse. But what he says, which is so amazing and so powerful, he says, what 14-year-old child speaks like that? This is his false confession, you know? And people almost for the first time began to see it and say, damn, how did we believe that? How were we all tricked and how were we all duped into believing that these guys were the guys who did this crime? We were so tricked
that the real perpetrator, who was still out there committing more crimes. Our parents and our supporters used to always say, you got the wrong guys. You need to be out there looking for the real perpetrator of this crime. This guy was the East Side Raper, also known as the East Side Slasher. And he was still out there committing more crimes. Ultimately, he was able, one of his last crimes he committed was murdering a pregnant Latina woman while her children were in the next room. This is some real serious stuff, you know.
That is insane, actually. From the support that you did have, and of course you did lack support in some instances as well, did anyone doubt you're really going to accomplish anything when you're working towards your exoneration? Because it took almost over a decade to get it.
You know, I think all of us, in some way, form, or fashion, had hope that the truth was going to come out. We hoped that the truth was going to come out then, you know, back when we were going through this hell. But we, I know sometimes I would speak to like Antron McCray, and one of the things that we were very fearful of was they were able to convict us. They were able to place charges on us that we didn't do. And we were like, are they, even when it came down to the city saying, we're going to give you guys a settlement, even down to that wire, we still were kind of like, is something strange going to happen where they're going to take that away as well? You know, some of us still look at our bank accounts and look and see and make sure, oh man, okay, the check came this month. Because we all got, instead of us we took a lump sum, but instead of us taking a lump sum of everything, we were all intelligent enough to say, you know what, let's not become like a person who wins the lottery and just loses their mind. They have all of this money that they never had before. You know, let's be smart and wise about our decisions. And what we did was we said, you know, we're going to spread this over the course of our life. And so at the end of a certain period of time, we're going to get our initial investment back, and we were going to get a certain amount of money every single month, so that if we didn't want to work for the rest of our lives, we didn't have to. If anybody that was involved with us didn't want to work for the rest of their lives, they didn't have to. If we needed money for our children to be able to go to college and for them to further their educational skills and any, you know, it's funny because when you think about what money can do, you know, some people have what I call incubation processes where they can just start things up themselves. You know what, I want to try to see what a shoe line may look like. You know, so they just put money in and say, you know what, okay, I tried, you know. And when you have that kind of ability, it's amazing to see that. It's amazing to see that there are people who live a life that is so far in luxury. And then when you look at the places like Baltimore where these riots are happening, and they're snapping people's spines and saying, oh no, this was something that they did themselves. You know, when you look at Garfield, New Jersey, and you had the young man who was in the police precinct, and he is seen on camera running out of the police precinct, and they said, oh, he was found in an abandoned building and he shot himself in the head. You know, all of this crazy stuff that's going on, you know, but you look at all of the conditions that the people are in, and then you say to yourself, wow, they gave the Central Park Five $41 million. We sued for $250 million. Even if we would have gotten $250 million, that would have been a drop in the bucket compared to the real wealth that people have in this country. I get email alerts every day about apartments and things for sale and stuff like that, and they have places for rent where the rent is $13,000 a month. That's how crazy it is. But there's people that's paying $13,000 a month. You see what I'm saying?
So when it comes to the politics side of that, and you received your settlement about 12 years afterwards, and by then we had de Blasio as a mayor instead of Bloomberg.
Yes.
Do you think that had any impacts on when you received your settlement?
You know, there's always the story, and there's the behind the story. The behind the story piece is most people don't realize, they don't know there's connections with people. The connection with Bloomberg to the jogger, they both worked at Solomon Brothers. They both worked there. She, when she was working there, she got assaulted and raped and lost her memory. I don't know exactly at what point he was working there, but he got a wonderful severance package, which allowed him to say, you know what, I'm going to become the mayor, and I'll just take a penny as my salary per year. But what was he doing? So if you look at the backdoor deals that he was able to put together, those 1 cent or $1 he took per year was nothing compared to the kind of arrangements and agreements that he was able to make. He built an empire, and I think I just heard on the news the other day that he's planning on running for mayor in London or something like that. You can't make this kind of stuff up, but, de Blasio, with him becoming the new mayor and with him having a black wife, it signaled to the public at large that this was a different kind of mayor. This was a mayor who could understand on some levels what it was that we as a larger group of people, even though they call us the minority, we are actually the majority. The larger group of people were actually going through. And so when we were talking about things like stop and frisk, he knew exactly what was going on with that because he had a son who was black that he had to talk about or talk to. Listen, I need you to be able to be safe. This is what you do when you encounter officers and so forth and so on. So it wasn't like, it was a done deal that as soon as de Blasio came into office, we were going to win. It was still a fight. When you think about the politics of everything, you can't, one of the things that we have to do as a people, and I'm not necessarily talking about de Blasio right now, but I'm talking about as a people, when we talk about things like voting power, and we talk about things like, just the power of the people in general, we have to realize that when we vote someone into office, we as a people did that. And we as a people have the ability to go to that person and say, okay, this is what you told us that you were going to do. Now we're here so that you can make good on it. This is not going to be a situation where you're just going to get into office and all the stuff that you ran on goes to the wayside,
Thank you for that. With the other men that were convicted with you, and now that I'm assuming they're home as well, do you believe that they would share similar stories with you when it comes to political views or situations that they've experienced?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Every one of us has had good experiences and bad experiences, especially the political view on the stuff that's going on. It's amazing to be able to be on the inside looking out as opposed to being on the outside looking in. So we have the perspective of being on the outside looking in because we're free now, whereas one point we had the perspective of being on the inside looking out. And we had that perspective really for most of our lives. We grew up in prison. I don't really know what it's like to be a young person in New York City. I was 15 years old when they took me off the streets. So for the rest of my young life, that was, involved with, trying to figure out how I was going to be safe, how I was going to make sure that nobody stabbed me or how I was going to make sure that nobody poisoned me or something like that. They're doing this type of stuff is stuff that we used to tell people that they were doing. And then all of a sudden in 2015, you got reports of them finding rat poison in the food on Rikers Island. We were telling people about this stuff.
That's a survival story.
Listen, some people, and it's weird because when you're in prison, Kendrick Lamar said something real interesting on his last album. He said, the only place that a black man is guaranteed a job is in prison. Now that's a sad reality. My highest paying job in prison was 50 cents an hour. And so when I went to the commissary to buy things like toothbrushes and toothpaste and sometimes goodies like ice cream and stuff like that, these things cost the same price as they cost on the street. If I wanted ice cream, it cost $5 and change. If I wanted to buy a toothbrush, that might have been $2 and change. Toothpaste, it's the same price, but they're paying us 50 cents an hour. And the worst part about it is that there's a lot of big corporations that are I was going to say buddies with the prison industrial complex, but that doesn't really paint the right picture. Some of these prisons are being sold on the stock market. So there's companies who actually have hired inmates while they're in prison. I don't know what company particularly, but I know that they have a list of this stuff. But let's say I called up a company that I had a credit card with, and I said, you know what, I'm just calling to make sure that my these charges on my account are accurate. I might be calling into a prison. But the worst part about it is that this same inmate can't come home from prison and say on his resume, I am a seasoned employee, for instance, with AT&T or with Victoria's Secrets or any number of these places. They got to come home and say, my gap in my employment history is that I was in prison. Because like for my case, I was happy when I first came home from prison because on the job applications, it said something like, have you been convicted of a crime within the past 7 years? So as the 7-year line was approaching, I was getting happier and happier because I was finally able to say no, because it's been 7 years and a day, you know? Then they changed the law. So now if you look at any job application right now, it says, have you ever been convicted of a crime? And then right underneath it says, this will not hinder your opportunities of employment with us. They should just say wink, wink with that, right? I mean, that's really how it goes down. So usually when I used to go for interviews for, to try to get a job, I would always leave that part blank. Because one of the things that I knew was that if I could get my foot in the door by talking with the prospective employer, that I might have a better opportunity to get that job. You know, when I came home from prison, one of the things that people always ask me, like, well, how did you do what you did and how did you get the jobs that you got and stuff like that? Part of it was that I was self-taught in many ways. You know, you would come to my mother's office and on the walls in my book, in my particular office space, all of the books that you saw were books on technology. There is no iPhone with a white button. That just doesn't, that's not how Apple makes their iPhones. This iPhone cracked. I was playing around one day and slipped and the whole screen was shattered. I didn't have insurance on it because I don't usually buy insurance on stuff, because usually what happens is that the insurance runs out just when you really need it.
That's true.
So I said, you know what? Nah, I don't need insurance. I know how to fix these things. The screen cracked. I was like, oh man, okay. I called up the people that I usually get my parts from, got the part, put this on, and now, as you saw, it works.
Now you have a good phone.
Now I have a good phone. And that's the same thing with the iPads and stuff like that. Same thing happened to this. But that type of technology was something that was like a part of me. It was like second nature, you know. So when I was first hired into some kind of technical industry, I got hired at New York Presbyterian Hospital, and it was wonderful. History from there.
So as one last question, one piece of advice that you would give to anyone in similar situations, what would it be? It can be anything that you want them to know about the Central Park 5 or how anything influenced your decisions now. There's
a famous photo. I put this photo up on one of my social networks. And I mean, I'm all over the place. I'm on Twitter, Tumblr, Instagram, Pinterest. I just got a Snapchat. Don't really know how to use it, but I got it. But I'm everywhere, right? And I use my real name so people can look me up and find me. But there's a famous photo that I put up once. And this photo was of a pelican eating a frog. And the frog was almost being completely consumed by this pelican. But the frog had its arms or its hands around the pelican's neck. And so the pelican couldn't swallow the frog. And the caption said, "Never give up." And so one of the things that I tell people all the time is never give up hope. When you're going through something so destructive as the prison industrial complex, never give up hope. When you want to become a productive citizen in society, even if you committed the crime that you went to prison for, never give up hope in thinking that you can never come back to society and to do better, you know. And that's just one of the mantras that I've always had for myself, you know. I think that if we saw ourselves as role models in some way, form, or fashion, it would change the perspectives that we have and change a lot of the things that we do.
And I think that is one great piece of beautiful advice. And I want to thank you so much for coming on to Harlem Beat today.
Well, thank you.
And back to you, Myra.
Thank you, Dominic. Such a great interview with Mr. Salam. Now we're going to take a break and we'll be right back.
You're listening to WHCR 90.3 FM, the voice of Harlem.
Every 107 seconds, an American gets sexually assaulted, according to the Rape, Abuse, and Incest National Network. Although it may last for seconds, the effects can last forever. Regardless of what it is you look like, you could be a victim of sexual assault. Although preventing a sexual assault may be hard, there are things you can do to protect yourself. Walk in groups. Most sexual assaults happen to those who are alone. Be conscious of your surroundings. Look around. Avoid walking with both headphones in your ears. If you see something, say something. If you or someone you know is or was a victim of sexual assault, you can call the Rape, Abuse, and Incest National Network, also known as RAIN with 2 N's, at 1-800-656-HOPE, or email them at info@rain.org.
On Saturday, May 2nd from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m., City College's Sophie Davis School of Biomedical Education will host a health fair. Activities include free medical, dental, and eye checkups. There will be Zumba and yoga classes, healthy food samples and recipes, blood pressure, blood sugar, HIV tests, and more. That's Sophie Davis Health Fair, Saturday, May 2nd from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. at the City College of New York. Entrance is located at Amsterdam Avenue and 138th Street in Harlem, New York.
Don't touch that dial. Keep it locked on